Hello, I'm Toycat, and the British Empire was the largest the world had ever seen, and it was often referred to as the empire on which the sun never set, because of just how much of the earth it covered. This is something people stopped saying in 1997 when Hong Kong was handed over to China, and as a result there were no large population centres left in the empire, basically saying that it was over. But technically speaking, losing population centres is not the same as losing land, and this is what the UK looks like today because of its overseas territories that do still remain. And so, technically speaking, the sun still never sets over the British Empire. That was true as of 2013, but something crazy has just happened that means that in 2025, the sun will finally set on the British Empire, and as a result, after 200 years, there will be darkness across the entire UK all at the same time, and this raises a couple of questions. Why did that happen? Is it actually true? I had to fact check it myself, and most importantly, there is the fun question of who is the empire in which the sun never sets now. There are two main contenders, and I want to dive into each of those after we talk about the biggest news this year, in my opinion. A huge amount of territory has just changed hands, and I think the complexity of what the Chagos Islands are, the fact that most people don't know overseas territories, or honestly even Mauritius, mean that most people aren't following this judgment super closely, but it is an absolutely historic one because the UK is giving up sovereignty of a strategically important cluster of islands in the Indian Ocean, referred to as the British Indian Ocean Territory. To look at this map very briefly, there are 14 overseas territories of the UK, soon to be 13, but you can loosely group these into the Caribbean islands, which all do have populations, but don't really have a large enough one to necessarily govern themselves, maybe minus the Cayman Islands. They could be an independent country, but most of these places are, they couldn't necessarily be fully independent, and so they still exist partially inside the UK. Then you've got places that have very, very low or no population centres, and then you've got military bases, which could loosely describe Gibraltar, the Cyprus territories, and the British Indian Ocean Territory. The Pitcairn Islands are the lowest populated, like a place that can be described as any amount independent, and the British Indian, which they have about 50 people there, by the way, and the British Indian Ocean Territory has about 0 permanent population. And maybe if you count American soldiers, it's a bit higher, but let's be honest, we don't. And so, who does count American soldiers as people? But one of the things that is worth mentioning is that there are American soldiers there because of the weird way that the Chagos Islands came to be the British Indian Ocean Territory. Looking on a map, there is no way you would ever guess that this place right here, by the way, it's absolutely in the middle of nowhere. You would never say that this should be a part of this country over here. So what gives? Well, Mauritius used to be part of the British Empire, as this map will tell you. They're a tiny speck here, and one of the parts of Mauritius were the Chagos Islands. Why is that the case? Because the British kind of put it there, I guess you could say, and Mauritius has been arguing ever since their independence that when they got their independence, they had to, against their will, illegally give the Chagos Islands away in order to get that. The UK said, you can go independent, but we're going to keep these islands that have basically no one on them. And what did they do with those islands that had basically no one on them? Well, they deported all of the people, about 1,000 islanders, and said, oh yeah, you have to go back, live in Mauritius again now. That's your problem. Sorry about these islands, but we're going to need them because, as it turns out, this is a hugely important place on the map. Seriously, it can't be overstated enough just how important it'd be to be in the middle of this sea here, close to the subcontinent, close to the Middle East, close to Africa, close to Southeast Asia, and even Australia, if you want to keep an eye on them. Having a territory and a military base here was hugely valuable, which is why when we talk about this place, the UK, likes to project power globally a little bit, but really it's a US-UK military base because the US wants to be involved there too, and so for the past 50 years, that's what's been the case. The UK got rid of the islanders, built a military base, and now there is an uninhabited piece of territory on which that exists. Okay, so far so good, everything making sense here now, right? Also, apparently the Google is broken here. So why now what has happened? Basically, in these territories, the people said we don't like that we were removed illegally, and they've tried to sue in multiple places with many other African nations trying to argue that this is an issue of decolonization. And honestly, most of the UK's traditional allies have not been backing the UK on this one, and so the UN said you have to leave in a few months, a few years ago, and then now finally the UK says sure, we'll give it over. This is something which is such an asterisk. It sounds like it's a win, right? The native people finally get what they want, but actually what's happening is the UK is handing these islands to Mauritius, the people who asked for them, including Diego Garcia. However, at the exact same time, they're saying, but we're going to keep our military base there, or rather Mauritius is saying, yeah, we're going to let them keep their military base there, but in exchange for that, they're going to give us some money. In effect, the territorial status is changing hands. In effect, it will be a part of Mauritius now and not a part of the UK, but a joint British-US military base is still going to exist there, and so nothing changes, especially for the native people, which, by the way, a lot of them are very, very upset because they're like, wait, we fought this whole campaign, we fought this whole campaign, and it's like, oh, yeah, we actually don't get to have it anymore because Mauritius is now betraying us, not the British. Oh, as it turns out, big countries don't want to give you back your sovereignty. They want to have a bunch of money. And so, in effect, the UK has signed a deal giving Mauritius money, and Mauritius has gone, oh, yeah, we got the money. What's that territory? I don't remember what that's all about. And so, no one really wins if they're native people. But the British Indian Ocean Territory is no longer British. It'll soon be, by the way, technically not yet. If you actually read into the deal, the announcement was made by the UK and Mauritius, and it will happen very soon. It's not technically been signed yet. It is going to be happening very, very soon. It's subject to finalization of a treaty, but both sides have promised to do that as quickly as possible. And so, as a result, the UK will give sovereignty of the Chagos Islands over. But then that raises the question of, oh, so if the UK is losing its eastmost territory, as you can see on this map, that is very much true, then will the sun finally set on the British Empire? Will this article from 11 years ago be incorrect? And yes, as it turns out, this winter in the UK, it's a winter here, I should say, is currently summer in Antarctica. So, despite the fact that there is a gap in the British Empire emerging, the British Antarctic Territory and the South Georgia and Sandwich Islands will be having such continuous daylight that there will not be a time where the sun sets this year, but as soon as next summer comes, it will be winter in the British Antarctic Territories, and that is when the Pitcairn Islands will become the furthest west sunrise, sunset, and the British and the Aokotri and Dhekelia will become the furthest east, as opposed to this place right here. And before that point, these two places would have sun. Well, there would always be sun between one of these two lands, but as this Reddit post here delightfully points out, the sun will set on the Pitcairn Islands at 1850, 2:50 London time, and it will be a good hour or so till it rises in Aokotri and Dhekelia. This is something that I had to fact check myself because you can just say it in a Reddit post, right? Like, this map looks pretty convincing that, as you can see, darkness on the Pitcairns, darkness in Cyprus, but I wanted to confirm myself. So here is the sunset time in the Pitcairn Islands. It's 6:50 p.m. GMT -8, and here is the sunset time in Aokotri, 6:19 a.m. So there is going to be about a 12-hour gap, except because of time zones, Cyprus is about 3 hours ahead of the UK, and the Pitcairn Islands are about 8 hours behind. So you can add the 11 hours to that if you want to, but it still means that the sun will be setting at about 5:50 a.m. and it won't be rising until 6:19 a.m. There is going to be 29 minutes where the sun is set on the British Empire on the 21st of March 2025. This is a disastrous moment. It goes without saying, if you want to see the map, by the way, here's what it looks like. It is nowhere near as bad as the Reddit post points out, but as you can see, technically speaking, there's no sun on Cyprus and there's no sun on the Pitcairns, and so that is when the British Empire finally has the sun set on it. Now, technically speaking, it's only going to set on the British Empire for the British overseas territories for about 6 months a year. The other 6 months a year, the Antarctic territory will be covered, but still, I don't think most people argue you can really own Antarctica. So at that point, every single technicality is lost, and the British Empire has lost its sun and probably will never regain it. I mean, I don't imagine any of these places to the east of Cyprus are looking at rejoining the UK anytime soon. I don't imagine any of the places to the west of the Pitcairn Islands, basically anything around here, is looking to join the UK or give up one of their islands. But, if they were looking to do that, then the UK could, we have 6 months to get these deals done. I'm just saying, if I'm Keir Starmer right now, right, and I'm signing this big deal to have the sun set on the British Empire, I think that I would be, looking at some deals with some countries in the region. We've clearly proven that giving money to people makes problems go away. And so, maybe give some money to a small, Pacific Island nation, maybe one that used to be part of the UK. And you might get some good problems. I mean, Tuvalu, they've been whoring themselves out for that domain name for a while. Maybe they'd be willing to give a little bit, of one of their island or one of their little pieces of territory up, just so the UK could have that. I'm just saying, get creative, Keir Starmer. You got 5 months, make it happen. But more seriously, outside of my dumb flag waving about the British Empire, I think it's worth saying that, yeah, this is a huge historic moment, but now, which empires does the sun not set on? Well, no country describes itself as an empire anymore. That word is generally seen as bad, and you know, colonialism is also seen as generally bad these days, and so most countries won't describe themselves as an empire, but there are two main contenders for one that could. The first is America. The United States is a country which I just, I think it's very funny because they never, you know, outside of going west to Alaska and Hawaii, they really never got deep into the settling colonies game, maybe because they're too much of a colony themselves, but they do have military bases everywhere in the world. Now, these military bases are on sovereign territory of the countries they're on, but I mean, is it really sovereign territory if you have a bunch of guns and say, stay out of here? That's a debate for another time, but yeah, the US doesn't call this an empire, but they do have military influence and control over large military hegemony over these places, and so you could say the sun never sets on the American empire. You know, American-owned bases will always have sunlight on them, but again, I think that's too much of a technicality when there's a clear answer if you're looking for it, and that is France. France actually considers all of these places not to be a French overseas territory. That's what the UK delightfully calls ours. No, this is France. This is a map of France, and that is why the map of Eiffel Towers per capita in French Guiana is actually one, because this is what France looks like. I mean, some people would say, oh, it's a very weird looking country, but you know what? I would say you have a weird looking face. I'm just kidding. I don't need to lash out in defense of France. No one should be defending France, but they will be the empire on which the sun never sets, and the only country for where that is truly accurate year-round using properly recognized definitions of it, which I think is hugely interesting. And so maybe you think that's hugely interesting too. This is a country on which there will be sun forever until they have to give up one of these places. When will that happen? Well, New Caledonia's been looking at independence, but you also then need Wallis and Futuna and also French Polynesia to leave for that to make any sense. And then also, I just think as a result, therefore, by the way, you actually are looking at a world where the French Empire might become the longest one where the sun never sets. And yeah, more seriously, I feel like we could have the conclusion that, like, okay, I guess France is the empire now, but I think a more serious one would be like, okay, so the UK for 200 years has had this sun never setting on it, and what has the loss of the British Empire actually massively achieved? And I want this to be just a moment of saying, I am the sort, I'm a big devil's advocate, and I like to defend the undefendable. And the one thing the world generally agrees on is that, yeah, I don't think colonialism is good. Even if you defend existing colonies, you wouldn't want to start any more up, right? And that's because, yeah, people should have the right to define their own destiny, but consider what's actually happening in the British Indian Ocean Territory. Sovereignty has moved hands, legally speaking, and money will be switching hands too. But in reality, what's happening there is, yeah, this military base, this wonderful looking military base, is just going to be moving from one set of hands. Military base will staying there, and the sovereignty moves, but nothing actually changes. And in some cases, you can make things actively worse. Hong Kong, when it was handed over to China, China agreed to leave it alone for 50 years, right? They said, we will let it be basically all of the benefits of being in the UK, but none of the downsides. But how is that going? Is Hong Kong better off being decolonized, being integrated into China? A lot of people, mostly ones who live in this place, would say, no, why did you betray us? And I think that's a really dark kind of point of this, is like, you can look like you're doing the right thing while still doing the wrong thing. The UK letting Mauritius free, but then keeping these tiny bits of territory that only 1,000 people lived on was a right thing to do, but clearly has caused all of these issues here. And I think that's something that you can kind of broadly look at, is that whenever the regime changes in a place, there are huge winners and losers, and you might think that it's always a big win if you let somewhere be independent, but you're just actually creating a new balance of power. And ultimately, what actually matters to people is if their living standards and conditions improve, not some magical idea of sovereignty, which is why all of the people who live in these territories, I mean, hopefully these ones too, but all the people who live in these territories, genuinely, if you kick them out of the UK, you would be doing them a disservice. And should you do that because it is decolonization, these places weren't obtained in any legitimate way. If you really want to go to the idea that you use war or violence to obtain things, and then you shouldn't get to have them. But then you could also argue, well, why does the UK get to own the UK? Isn't it kind of messed up that just because some French people came here 1,000 years ago and overthrew the Saxon kings of the time, isn't it messed up that they use violence and then they get to just control all of this? I think, therefore, that Westminster doesn't have any control over me in my home, and you get the idea, right? Like, every form of power and control and government requires violence or the threat of violence at some point. And so there is no correct sovereignty, but yet we have a world where we all kind of say, okay, but the systems we have just about work, I guess, and that's the world we live in. I'd love to talk about countries that, because ultimately the weird thing is most people don't question the UK owning this bit. They question it owning some land over there or land over there because it's disconnected. I want to talk about countries that own bits of territory that they really look like they shouldn't and ignore all of the historical context about why. And so you better believe you'll be seeing that in the future on this channel. Because yeah, if I was, a lot of Cypriots are upset that the UK owns some random territories here. It doesn't come up very often, but there's a little bit of resentment of like, wait, why the UK let Cyprus go independent but then kept these bits? Something seems a bit wrong there. And similarly, the UK basically gave up the US. You know, one of the reasons the UK put so much effort into fighting in Europe rather than keeping the US going independent was for this piece of territory. But the UK puts lots of effort into keeping these pieces that it has. Is that a good thing? Is that a right thing or a wrong thing? I don't know. The answer is that it is a thing, though. And for now, I hope you enjoy the current update on this, and I'll update you. And if, you know, if I was Keir Starmer, I would be looking into delaying this deal until just after the sun is finally setting again. But more seriously, I hope you enjoyed. And also, I want to say that, yeah, this whole thing is kind of a reminder that the world is changing very quickly around us, and the sorts of things that the media pays attention to might not be the same ones that you care about, but hopefully you found this to be hugely interesting. And if you did, then I guess, I don't know, consider giving money to the channel on Patreon. Look at that. Another person upgraded from free. I didn't know you could become a free Patreon, but if you want to help give me some lobster roll money, consider doing that at patreon.com/toycat. For now, though, thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you in Hong Kong. I was there during a... Oh, wait, actually, I've got a fun thing. I just want to mention this, because it relates to a coin I just found on my desk here. So when the UK let Mauritius go free, right, they separated some territories off from it, but they've actually done the opposite a few times. Obviously, the case of India is maybe one you could mention. But the most interesting example to me is Malaysia, where I just came back from, by the way. And Malaysia is this really interesting example. If it was called British Malaya, and then the UK went, oh yeah, by the way, we've got these other territories in the region. Could you have those for us, please? And they went, yeah, even though Malaysia was very heavily Muslim and made up of Malay people, and the people of Sarawak and Sabah are largely, they were largely indigenous peoples, they just kind of combined together, and now I've got this coin that represents the 50th anniversary of Malaysia. It's a very beautiful coin, but on the back you can see they're like, yeah, this is what Malaysia looks like, with this very logical connection of about, 11 states, and then we're also this connection of 2 states over here on this island, which we share with 2 other countries. This makes sense. This is a logical country. Don't question it, and that is just, the world goes, oh yeah, I guess so. It's not that far from your mainland, really, is it? But then the Riau Islands, they get to be part of Indonesia, even though they're between the 2 bits of Malaysia. There's a lot of questions, and I'm not going to give you answers today. I'm just going to say thank you for watching. By the way, goodbye.